Welcome back, everybody. Excited to begin our third webinar in the series of History of Israel. In the first two, we talked about the importance of Israel in geography, the fact that it's the land in between. We talked about the beginning from creation period all the way to Noah and his children. We talked about Abraham and him hearing the voice of God telling him to go to the place that he will show him. Abraham makes his way to Canaan. From there, we talked about Jacob turning his name into Israel and having his children, the 12 children of Israel. They're going to make their way to Egypt, where they start becoming the tribes. They procreate and fill the land. They are enslaved. They have to leave. Moses and Aaron take them from Egypt through the desert, where they have the tabernacle. They have the Ark of the Covenant with them. They make their way to the eastern side of the Jordan River. And now Joshua is going to lead the people across the Jordan and start conquering the land, Canaan, starting to conquer the land of Israel. There was no void. People have been living here while the Israelites were in Egypt and in the desert. We call them the Ites, the Jebusites, the Midianites, the Canaanites. There's an exception to the rule. So we also talked about the Philistines. And the book of Judges shows us how all of the tribes find a leader, a judge to rally behind, and they're going to fight these ites to try and conquer and settle down in the land. Some of the battles they win, some of the battles they lose, but eventually all of the tribes settle down, and 40 years of quiet time for each tribe. This entire conquest takes roughly 500 or so years. And at the end of it, the Israelite tribes look around them and they see that all of the other nations have kings ruling over them. They go to their prophet, who in turn comes to God. God is not thrilled with the idea of a king, but he says, let's give it a shot. And they find someone that both the people like and God likes. His name is Saul. And Saul becomes the first king of the Israelite people. Uh, Relatively a good king until he meets an enemy in the field that he doesn't know how to face, a giant of the Philistine army called Goliath. And into our story comes our man David, the youngest of his brothers. He came actually to bring refreshments to his brothers in the field. But when he sees that Goliath is defying God and defying the Israelites and nobody dares to stand up to him, David goes to the king, to Saul, and he tells him, I'll do it. I'm going to kill this giant for you. And David goes without armor, without weapons other than his handy slingshot. And it's not a slingshot with the rubber band, the one that you pull back. It's the one you twirl around your head. This has awesome firepower. This is a very deadly weapon when you know how to use it. It always helps when God is helping to aim. And David uses his slingshot with the stones to hit Goliath in the forehead. Goliath falls down. David takes Goliath's sword, cuts his head off, and presents the head of Goliath to the king. Now, the king, as we said, promised whoever defeats this giant will marry one of his daughters, essentially becoming a prince. But what David did not do is he did not present the sword of Goliath to King Saul. And this is seen as a slight by the king. Usually, if you remember in any medieval movies that you saw or series, when a knight goes out in honor of his king to defeat the monster or to defeat an enemy, when he returns, if it was successful, he presents the king with the treasure. And in this case, the treasure is probably Goliath's sword, made out of iron, something that the Israelites don't know how to mend yet. This is one of the big tactical advantages that the Philistines had. This is why they were probably the biggest enemy and the strongest enemy that the Israelites faced in the land of Israel. The Philistines know how to mend iron, while the Israelites only know how to mend bronze. Bronze is a softer metal. So when you go to attack with an iron sword and shield against someone who has a bronze sword and shield, obviously you have an advantage. But it doesn't stop there. It's also an advantage in agriculture because an iron pickaxe or an iron shovel will last longer than a bronze one. And if that iron tool is destroyed or is damaged, you have to buy a new one or you have to get it fixed with someone who knows the trade. So it's also an economic advantage. So iron was a very important issue. Metals as a whole are very important in the Bible, and it's something that is not outwardly spoken about, but you can read it in between the text. And definitely when you come to Israel, it gets a lot easier to understand all of these smaller issues that we talk about here. The Philistines themselves are a people of the sea, and they control most of the coastline of the land of Israel. Not only in the land of Israel, back in those days, you were able to find evidence of the Philistines in Egyptian scrolls as well. And they controlled the area from Turkey along the coastline all the way to Egypt. Originally, we believe that they were from somewhere around Greece, around the Aegean Sea. They got into their boats and started sailing and brought their technology with them. Technology that being mending iron, of course. So the main 5 cities along the coastline are Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and one that is not exactly on the coastline but close to it is Gat, and this is where this giant Goliath comes from. After defeating the giant and marrying the princess, David is in somewhat of a crazy relationship with the king until the king's jealousy takes over. And at this point, David has to run away and hide. He hides in various places. We even saw, if you came with me on a tour to Israel, we went to En Gedi and we saw the caves that David was hiding in. Saul hears that David is in the caves of En Gedi and brings thousands of his troops to find him. But of course, David is God's anointed. He is the chosen one. And no matter what King Saul is going to try to do, he just can't seem to get his hands on David. Eventually, Saul in his campaigns against the Philistines is going to die along with his sons. And even though there's a very short period, according to the Bible, that one of the remaining sons, a guy called Ishbosheth, takes the throne of his father and anoints himself as king, the people don't really accept that as a true kingship, and David is the next king. So if we want to take the Bible literally, then King Saul is the first king of the Israelites, Ishbosheth is the second, and David is the third king. By all means, David is the most famous king of all. He is the greatest conqueror the Israelites know. He goes all the way to Turkey in the north with his conquests and to the south, past modern day Saudi Arabia, commercial ties probably reaching all the way to Yemen. And he also conquers a city that until now we hardly mentioned, a city called Jerusalem. Now, the name Jerusalem is a pagan name given by either the Jebusites or the Canaanites, and it depicts a god called Shalem. He's a Canaanite war god. And the word Ur, just like if you remember, Abraham comes from Ur Kasdim, U-R. Ur means city. So Ur Shalem, Ur Salima. This is the city of Shalem, the city of the god Shalem. King David, a monotheistic guy, he wants to change the name from Jerusalem to Zion. For whatever reason, we're not exactly sure why, the people continue to call the city Jerusalem, and that name is the one that we use even today, 3,000 years after the time of King David, which is one of the biggest historical ironies there are as far as I'm concerned, because Jews, Christians, and Muslims who all believe in one God still call one of the holiest cities in the world under a pagan god's name. However, let's go back in time. David conquers the city of Jerusalem. He buys the area where the temple is going to be built. He doesn't conquer, he buys it. That means that he has a deed to the property, basically. And he wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant up to the city of Jerusalem and then north of the city to the place that he just bought. And he's going to build a small altar to start doing God's work. He cannot build a temple. He is a man of war. He has too much blood on his hands. So for the time being, an altar is enough. His son Solomon, if you hear his son Solomon, in Hebrew, Shlomo, you can hear the word shalom in the name Shlomo. Shalom means peace. So Solomon is a king of peace. King Shlomo, king of peace. He's the one who's going to build the actual temple. And we today know in hindsight that this is going to be what we can reference to the first temple. It lasts for about 400 years. And in these 400 years, I want to highlight a few events that take place. First of all, after King Solomon dies, the kingdom splits. Yerovam is going to be ruling in the north, And under his rule, we have the 10 tribes of the north. And then we have Judah and Benjamin still maintaining control of the city of Jerusalem and the temple in the southern area. One of the big problems Jeroboam is going to have is the fact that every time there's a holiday, the tribes of the north have to go to the temple to give their tithe or tithe. They have to give their sacrifices. And he is afraid that if they leave the area of the north and go to Jerusalem, they will remember that the true temple is in Jerusalem. And maybe even worse than that, they'll pay taxes not to him, but to the king of Jerusalem, Rehoboam. So he needs to create a diversion. He needs to create a substitute for the temple in Jerusalem. What he's going to do is build 2 altars, one in Dan and one in a place called Beit El, Bethel. As you can see, Bethel is a little bit to the north of the city of Jerusalem, right over here. And the idea is to mark the area of rule of the northern kingdom, of the 10 tribes of Israel. From Beit El to Dan, this is the area of rule of Yerovam, the area of the 10 tribes of Israel. He is going to bring Kohanim to these 2 places, Dan and Beit El, and now the 10 tribes of the north can come to either one of these and give their sacrifices just like they did in Jerusalem. It's as though you're in Jerusalem without being in Jerusalem. And in come the Assyrians. The Assyrian capital is Nineveh, which is a little to the north of Babylon, as we're marking it over here. And at its height, the Assyrian Empire controlled all of this area that I am marking here. Parts of modern-day Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, even parts of Egypt, into Saudi Arabia, all of this, what we can call Iraq and Iran today. This was a huge, huge empire. And these Assyrians invade into the land of Israel. Interestingly, they have a very, very odd way of ruling. Let's take the map of Asia, for example. The Assyrians are pagans. They believe in all of the gods. And they believe, just like all the rest of the pagans, that every god controls a specific territory of land on earth. If you want to appease this god, you need to know how to do it in his own land. Now, let's say that the Assyrians conquered all of Asia. What they're going to do is take the people of Turkey, displace them, and put them in China. They're going to take the Chinese and move them to India. They're going to take the Indians and they're going to place them in, let's say, Saudi Arabia. They're going to take the Israelites and disperse them all over the area that they control. And they're going to move other people into the land of Israel. Now, the Bible tells us that when these people were displaced, they complained to the Assyrian rulers that they don't know how to worship this God in the land of Israel. And therefore, the Assyrians brought Kohanim from the 10 tribes to teach these people, these new people, how to worship the Israelite God. Fast forward a little bit. If you remember, when the Israelites or the Jews returned from Babylon, they find people named the Samaritans who are worshiping the God of Israel, but are not from our people. They're not Jewish people, but they serve the God of Israel. Odds are, and this is one of my favorite theories, odds are that the Samaritans were people that were brought here by the Assyrians in those conquests. The Assyrians, when they conquered the land of Israel, they only managed to conquer the north. They are not successful in conquering Jerusalem. 200 years after the Assyrian conquests come the Babylonians. And the Babylonians are successful in conquering the city of Jerusalem. And at this point, the majority, the vast majority of the people living in and around the city of Jerusalem are from one specific tribe, from the tribe of Judah. If you're from the tribe of Judah, you are referred to as a Jew. If you were from the tribe of Dan, you were a Danite. From Ephraim, an Ephraimite. Benjamin, a Benjaminite. The Babylonians do not make that distinction. And since the majority were from the tribe of Judah, they just call everybody who's there Jews. And this is why in modern day times, we refer to the Jewish people. Now, me personally, I can trace my heritage back to the tribe of Judah, and therefore I'm Jewish. My wife's father, he's from India. He's probably from the 10 tribes that were scattered by the Assyrians at some point. But even though she's not from the tribe of Judah, she is still referred to as a Jew because of what happened 2,500 years ago and the Babylonians exiling the people to Babylon. The people, the Jews, stay in Babylon for the next 50 years until the Persian Empire conquers the Babylonian one and has a different diplomatic agenda. They allow the people to return to their homes, not just the Jews, but all the people who were conquered by the Assyrians and by others. Anyone who wants can return to wherever he wants to go. The Jews take this opportunity to return to the land of Israel. The majority of the people coming back are not exactly rich because let's face it, Jerusalem was destroyed 50 years earlier. And if you're a rich person living in a 2 or 3 story high villa in the middle of the desert with a swimming pool, why would you go to a city that was just destroyed? So the poor people have everything to gain, return to the land of Israel, and want to start worshiping God where they're supposed to and in the way that they're supposed to. So they build a small altar, just like David did, exactly where the temple is supposed to be. And the more money they have, the fancier the temple gets. The book of Nehemiah, the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, tells that they have recreated Solomon's temple. But then we have an added notation there that the elderly who remember the Temple of Solomon say it's not exactly the same thing. Either way, for the next 100 years or so, the Jewish people are thriving under the Persian Empire. We have religious autonomy. We get to serve God in the city or at the temple where we're supposed to, the way we think we are supposed to. The only thing the Persians demand is that we pay their taxes on time. And as long as we understand that they are the political entity controlling the land of Israel, we have religious autonomy to worship God. And that's the main thing. Now, there's one event in the scroll of Esther that we read about where the advisor to the king of the Persians wants to kill all of the Jewish people in the world. This attempt is avoided, and as a result, the advisor himself is going to be killed. And since then, the Jewish people have a traditional holiday called Purim, Purim, kind of like Halloween, with an added bonus. We are basically commanded to get drunk and be happy when we're wearing costumes during this holiday. It's a lot of fun. You should come to Israel and see, especially in the religious sections, how they're drinking and enjoying and spreading their love for God. This happy drunk period ends. The Greeks, led by Alexander the Great, conquered the land of Israel from the Persians. The big difference for the Jews is who is the political entity controlling the land now. We still have religious autonomy. We just pay taxes to the Greeks instead of to the Persians. And for the next 100 years, everything runs relatively smoothly. But then comes a king called Antioch IV, and he is heavily in debt. He needs money. And the fastest way to find money is to go into the altars for all the different gods that the Greeks and the pagans believe in. So since he controls the area of Egypt, he goes into the Egyptian shrines and the Egyptian altars and he pillages them. And when he comes to the land of Israel, he pillages the Jewish temple also. This means that we no longer have religious autonomy. The temple is desecrated. So we rebel. At the head of the rebellion are a family of Kohanim, priests named the Hasmoneans. It takes 3 years of battles until we are able to kick the Greeks out of Jerusalem, purify the temple, and rededicate it to God. The word rededication in Hebrew is Hanukkah, and this is the reason why we celebrate Hanukkah. Every Jewish holiday has 3 stages. 1, somebody wants to kill us. 2, we survived. 3, let's eat. And by celebrating Hanukkah, we are going to end our webinar for today. I hope you learned something new. I hope to see you again next time. It was wonderful to have you. And we're going to continue this 2 weeks from now, back on Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time as usual. Bye-bye.